everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So, we're going to be starting on our unit today on the America spreading westward. Alright, a whole bunch of cool stuff is going to get talked about in this unit. Kind of jumping around. So, everything up to this point has been very linear. Through the War of 1812, this unit's going to talk a lot about the culture in America. So as we get further on in U.S. history, a lot of tension, especially over slavery and then the Civil War. We're going to kind of keep most of that in separate units. So the next unit will be very much about the tensions that arise over slavery, which absolutely is happening somewhat here, and you can't avoid talking about it somewhat in this unit. But the tensions over slavery, and then there's a whole unit on the Civil War will happen after this. This one really talks about the culture and America creating an identity in the 1800s after the War of 1812. All right, so let me make myself smaller here. Boop, 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 boop. And there I am. Move this thing out of the way there. All right, so this painting right here, and we'll talk about it a little bit here today. There's this concept called manifest destiny that we're going to talk about today. This picture embraces how America felt about this idea of manifest destiny, where America is going to spread west. It is this idea that America is God's chosen people, and it is our responsibility as Americans to aggressively move west regardless of who it negatively affects. This painting symbolizes that. All right, this is supposed to be like an angel, leading America further west. You got Indians that completely were viewed collectively almost as subhuman as a justification for the ability to take their land. So you got the buffalo and the Native Americans and wildlife. All of this is getting pushed off their land as America spreads west, and we'll talk about that a little bit here today. But the name of this painting is called American Progress by John Gast. All right. So we're going to start today. We are in the era of good feelings. So the War of 1812, we got destroyed by Britain. But it doesn't really matter what actually happened. All that matters is what people believe. You see a lot of that in society throughout time. Facts usually is what people believe. Sometimes that's not the case, and people will believe something that's not true, and history gets made off of what people believe, not what actually happened. Because your belief system is what shapes your integrity. It's what shapes your value system. It's what shapes your confidence. So what people believe is actually more important in history than what actually happens sometimes as far as human events and cause and effect. Because in the War of 1812, we got destroyed. Destroyed. But America doesn't think we did. America believes that we won. And we won, going away because we won the last battle at the Battle of New Orleans. And then England retreats. So therefore, we must have won. After the War of 1812, which was from 1812 to 1815, this is going to lead to a time period called the Era of Good Feelings. We're yes, we just won that war. We didn't, but we feel like we did. So that's all that matters here. So after the War of 1812, we feel like we're the greatest place on earth because we've had a Revolutionary War. We've fought for our ideals. We've won for our ideals. Then we fought them a second time, talking about England, and we beat them a second time. Look how awesome we are. After the War of 1812 ends, first off, a lot of countries don't really want to mess with us. There's not a lot they can get from us. And also, why would they? We're crazy. We'll never admit that we got beat. So, in a large part, and for a multitude of reasons, people just leave us alone. Now, our location in the Western Hemisphere absolutely plays a big part about that, because what are they going to come over here and take? So, pride and nationalism is going to come out after the War of 1812. Everybody's just bro hugging it out, like America's awesome. There's a time of relative peace. We feel like we've accomplished everything that we needed to this point with our independence, be taken seriously by the other countries. We're militarily powerful, that we think. So then we're going to really focus on our own culture and making an American culture. So after the War of 1812, it's like the United States of America, not the states that make up America. It's the United States. We start viewing ourselves as a collective group, and there is a new American identity that's going to come out in this time period that's referred to as the era of good feelings. So the era unites the states. Now, let me be very clear here. When we start talking about everybody hugging it out and broing it out, the majority of the population does not share in this. First off, women. Women are absolutely treated as second-class citizens in American society. They don't have the right to vote. Property ownership, while they have it, there are limits on that. So women, are not going to share in it the same way men are on this era of good feelings. And the huge elephant in the room that, while we're going to talk about it in detail as we get further on, is slavery. There are slaves in America. We're a country founded on freedom and equality and John Locke, that natural rights can't be taken from you by the government. And we have slaves. So the hypocrisy is not lost on historians, but it was absolutely lost on them. Everybody's high-fiving it out and ignoring the groups that absolutely are not sharing in this whole idea. And you see it just across the board until we get well past this era and historians look back on it and are like, look, that is insane, the hypocrisy, because the era of good feelings sure wasn't good feelings for the Native Americans, wasn't good for people that were in slavery, wasn't good for really anybody that wasn't a white male at the time. So the question here is, explain what the era of good feelings is and who was left out of this ideal. Like this ideal means like this mentality, like who wasn't sharing in it. And we had just talked about that. So if you want to pause me, feel free. All right, so we're going to start talking about life in the new nation in this era of good feelings. All right, education. Now, kids went to school, all right, and let me see if I can't find do I not have, here we are. It's a little out of order, but I'll throw this picture up here. So, this is like a one-room schoolhouse. Like, it's not like it. It literally is. So this is where you would go for your schooling. So education, America, unlike some of the other religious places around the world leading up to this, sometimes people are against an education for religious reasons or whatever. America never was. We always embraced education. But education in the 1800s means a whole lot different than education that exists present day. Back then, all right, you were a farmer. Just general, the majority of America were farmers. So you could go to school, all right, but you're only really going to school until you're like first, second, or third grade. The moment you can carry a bale of hay up a hill, you ain't going to school no more. You're a farmer. So the education, while it was open to everybody, and we wanted to have some type of education, and it was a valuable thing in American society, they didn't spend a lot of time teaching people complex philosophies and stuff like old ancient Greek cultures or anything like that. It was basically reading, writing, and being a good person. All right? And being a good person is subjective, means it's the opinion of other people. The whole point was to be a good American. All right? Be a good citizen in this society. And that's called Republican virtues. That's all that was taught in schools was Republican virtues. So in these one-room schoolhouses here, these kids are going to show up and they're going to talk about how to be a good American in the American society. I'll show you some of this stuff here. So here's what, not what I wanted to do. Boop. I put myself right there. So American virtues and values. So here's what makes a good American. And this is what the kids were taught from a young age. Self-reliance. Don't ask for help from somebody else. You go be a pioneer out here in the wilderness and you work, rely on yourself. Don't ask for help from other people. All right. Asking for help from other people is a sign of weakness in the 1800s. Don't ask for help. Always offer to help other people. All right. But never actually ask for it. Asking for help is a sign of weakness. Like that was ingrained in them. Like only rely on yourself. Self-reliance. Don't expect somebody else to do things for you. Hard work and sacrifice. It's not ever going to be easy. Work hard until you can't work anymore and then work another 4 hours. Like absolute, just work yourself to death. That is the American way. That is the logic. That is what people have taught. At no point is there downtime. is their relaxing time. Relaxing time means non-productive time, and you are getting behind everybody else. So hard work and sacrifice absolutely was a huge part of these Republican virtues. Don't waste things, save things, every little bit counts. These are very poor people. So while here we would interpret this as money, they're probably talking about any type of natural resources, anything like that. Very much save things and don't be wasteful. A lot of moral values, honor, integrity, humility. There wasn't a huge police force or anything like that. So communities had to monitor themselves. Now, that could be very brutal sometimes if they get tired of somebody who keeps making, and they just murder the guy. Today we'd call it an execution. But so you really had to teach them how to be good people, to function in a society. So honor, integrity, humility, all of these things were taught in school because you only get them for a few years. And they're taught at a very young age, and then they're sent away. Girls also were allowed education. There's nothing special about that other than the fact they were allowed. At no point in America did America be like, women shouldn't be allowed to read and write. Like, at no point was that a thing in our culture. And the only reason we really mention it here is because it was like that in some cultures. So in America, it was acceptable for women to be able to read and write and all that, mainly because everybody's very religious. And the Bible is a pivotal part of everybody's life, and you have to be able to read and write in order to be the level of religious that America still is at the time. So the question here is, what was the difference between Republican virtues and the way in which school is taught today? So pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. All right. So voting rights prior to 1820. So we talk a lot about voting rights in U.S. history, and it might seem boring to you, but it is incredibly important, like wildly crazy important over who has the right to vote. The reason it is incredibly important is because that is how our entire government functions. Whoever votes has the power. All right. So when they started in America, they started, and here's the initial requirements to be able to vote in America. You had to be white, male, and a landowner. So only white men who owned land could vote. Now, let me clarify white. So white in present day society means a whole bunch of different things. It's white and black. If a Hispanic is considered white in the 1800s. So when they talk about white, they're just saying black people can't vote. So while racism is something that really comes out after slavery ends, it still exists before. So there is somewhat of an argument that we'll talk about in here, and nothing's ever cut and dried, that how slavery is based a lot on the economic system and all this other stuff. While a lot of that is true, to try to say that racism doesn't exist prior to the end of slavery, that slavery is purely a class system and slavery doesn't exist at all until after slavery ends, which is something we will talk about because there's a lot of truth to that, but it is not an absolute. Racism absolutely existed before then in America in the Constitution, because you had to be a white male landowner in order to vote. Purely because, and let me explain racism, as we're going to talk a lot about racism in America 1. Racism, technically, and the way it is interpreted here, and the way it is the official definition of racism. Racism doesn't mean that you believe another group is inferior. Racism means you believe your group is better than all the other groups. So racism actually is a reflective, whoever's being a racist believes their race is superior to the other races. Racism, by the definition, doesn't technically mean they believe the other group is inferior, even though it means the exact same thing. All right. So it was a white supremacy mentality where white people are better than all the other races, so therefore they get all the rights. That was the logic, which is just as bad as saying the other groups don't get rights. But I just want to clarify that as we go through. So initially it was white male landowners. All right. It's very selective. All right. I got a little thing here of what got changed. So only property owners could vote at the time because they didn't want all these poor people messing up the government. It becomes pretty obvious pretty early on that if you only let the rich people vote, which is what the property owners were and not like tenants, if you only let the rich people vote, the society only caters to rich people. So it doesn't take long that they get rid. That's one of the first things they got rid of on the voting is like, all right, we're not going to have that requirement to vote. You don't have to be a property owner. Also, and this is important to point out because this lasts up until about the time your parents were born, right? If they're my age, a little before I was born, and probably in the 1970s. The voting age was 21. That's in the Constitution. They actually made a constitutional amendment to change the voting age from 21 down to 18 in the 1970s. So just like 50 years ago, because of the war in Vietnam. And the logic was, hey, if you can draft me at 18 years old and have me send me over to another country and I can die for this country, I should be able to vote for who's sending me there. It's a very strong argument. And only 50 years ago did they change that voting age down to 18. So in 1790, only white males owning property could vote. In 1810, the last religious prerequisite from voting is eliminated, which is kind of ridiculous that you had to be like Protestant. And it wasn't really enforced, so we don't talk about it a whole lot. Property ownership and all that gets thrown out. So gradually, each time they take away a requirement, more people can vote. It spreads democracy. Because the more people that can vote, the bigger democracy is, and the more people involved, the more fair of a society it is. There ends up being a thing called a literacy test, and we'll start talking about these in detail closer to the end of American One, because after the Civil War ends, literacy tests are a thing that's going to keep black people from voting, and it's completely unfair. Even if you were literate, they found a way to use the literacy test to keep you from being able to vote if you're an African American. But so if you notice, each time a group gets the right to vote, African Americans in 1865 with the 15th Amendment get the right to vote. All of a sudden, guess who the government starts caring about? Now, that's an awful example because they actually try to keep them from voting because they're powerful now. 1919, women get the right to vote. Guess who the government cares about is women, and they start catering to women. 1927, Native Americans get the right to vote. That's right, Native Americans are the last group in America to get the right to vote, and that was less than 100 years ago. As soon as Native Americans got the right to vote, they created the Bureau of Indian Affairs to help out the Native Americans. Having the right to vote means you have power, and all of a sudden the government cares about your group. So this is why it's so important. It was very selective at the beginning of who had the power. And as they start chipping away the requirements on each side and more people get to vote, it becomes more fair to everybody. What I should also point out is because such a few group of people had to vote, and this is what the first one here is, how's the concept of voting changed over time in the United States, is initially it's viewed that it's like the male of the household, who's the only one that got to vote, he wasn't supposed to be going and casting a vote for what he wants. He's supposed to be casting his family vote. So while today we think one person, one vote, the logic at the time, hundreds of years ago, was that the husband cast the family vote. Now, after like the Civil War, you're going to see the women's movement and the women's right to vote skyrocket. And here's why. 600,000 people will die, 600,000 men will die in the Civil War in the 1860s. That's over 500,000 families that don't get to cast a vote. Their wives, their widows, they have no say-so in the government. So while there's no war and everybody has a like forced nuclear family, a husband, wife, 17 kids kind of thing, it seemed relatively fair. And I do think maybe it wasn't as sexist as it seems, even though it very easily could have been. That it has changed over time to now it's one vote per person. That is the logic now. Whereas for a long time it was the idea of one vote per family. And then the next question is, what are some specific rule changes that allow more people to participate in democracy? We talked about those, so feel free to pause me and answer that, and we will move on. All right, new types of lifestyle. So America, we're a mobile society. This is what I mean by mobile society. Horse and wagon. So, I'll move myself off the screen. You can't see me. I know you missed my beautiful face. All right. So, the rest of the world is very jealous of America. Like, crazy jealous of America because we're a mobile society. So, what does a mobile society mean? It doesn't mean that we have a long commute to work. All right, that's not what a mobile society means. What a mobile society means is the fact that if we're not happy where we live, we can pack up and move. We're mobile. All right. America loves being off by in the middle of ourselves. No, we obviously had cities. If you're a city person, you can stay there. But if you want to go live in the country, there's plenty of countryside. This is what makes the rest of the world jealous of us, especially Europe, like England and France. They're packed in here in these cities. That's where the natural resources are. They don't have an option of moving out anywhere else and surviving. So when they see America, we're like, we're going to pack up and just move out west. They're like, I wish we could do that. So the fact that America can pack up and move out west makes us a mobile society. And it's not that we can travel every day, but like in our lifetime, we can pack up and move an entire state away and then move again and then move again. The fact that we can pack up and change our entire location like every generation was mind-blowing to the rest of the world, where they'd lived probably for 10 generations on the same street in a city in London or Paris or somewhere like that. So America is very much a mobile society. So this is my picture of mobile societies. We can hop up on horses and wagons and we can move out. So there isn't a ton of open land that can allow for people in Europe. In America, there is. So when they're packing up and they move out west, they want to be in the middle of nowhere. So you go top of a mountain, like put a little flag there. It's yours. There's nobody there. There's millions of Indians that we completely don't acknowledge as human beings or value their land. Like every time you're like, hey, America, then you hear more of the story and you're like, why do we have to be such jerks? We were. I mean, it's history, you know, facts. So we would just move out into the middle of the West. We find a mountain. I'm going to put a little flag there. This is my mountain, all right? Run off any natives that are there. So then you're sitting there like living. I don't know what this means by living, but whatever. You're living, you grow a family, all this other stuff on top of this mountain. You have all this area to farm, do whatever you want to. And then you see way off in the distance, a little plume of smoke on top of another mountain. You got neighbors. Some other settlers had moved in way off in the distance, and you feel crowded. Like, they're all up in my business. I'm going to pack up and move again. And then you head further out west because west, after the Louisiana Purchase, is just wide open space. So as a mobile society, one of the things that allowed us to be a mobile society is the Oregon Trail. So we'll reference this again in another lesson. But so Lewis and Clark, who had went out to explore the Louisiana Purchase, their route that they took to get all the way to the Pacific, so here, this is more or less the route, and I mean it is the route that Lewis and Clark mapped out, so you know that this is a safe passage, so that's why people always followed this at the time, that if you just wanted to move out west, you could. You just pack up and move. And you can see that these cities are going to pop up here as more people travel out there, but the Oregon Trail is a great example of being a mobile society. If you want to just pack up and start all over, you can. And that made us, the rest of the world is very jealous of us for us having the ability to do that because they couldn't. And they were very jealous that we were a mobile society, but the Oregon Trail is a great example of that because you just keep going as far west as you wanted. If you wanted to live here in Fort Laramie, awesome. If you wanted to go all the way up here to Whitman Mission, you could. You could do whatever you wanted. You could go live wherever you wanted, and you had the complete ability to move if you didn't like living there. So America being a mobile society is another part of this new culture that's going to come out in the United States in this era of good feelings. So the questions here is, what does it mean when people say that America is a mobile society? We had talked about that in detail. And then explain how the Oregon Trail is an example of America being a mobile society. So we just talked about that as well. So pause me, answer those completely, and then I'll move on to part 3. I will see you guys tomorrow.